Hello and welcome to another episode of Into the Afroverse with your host, William Jones. And Into the Afroverse is where we're taking Black folks into the future. We talk about Afrofuturism as we have been doing with this program now for almost a year. And I would like to thank everyone for their support and continuing to listen. We talk about Afrofuturism. Today we have one of, I don't know how to describe, I guess an architect of Afrofuturism, certainly someone that has played a huge role in getting Afrofuturism out there. Today we are joined by Dr. Reynaldo Anderson, and he currently serves as an associate professor of Africology and African American Studies at Temple University in Philadelphia. Reynaldo is currently the executive director and co-founder of the Black Speculative Arts Movement, or BSAM, an international network of artists, intellectuals, creatives, and activists. He is also the author of numerous articles on Africana studies and communication studies, and recently served as a member of the curatorial council for Carnegie Hall's Afrofuturism Festival. And with that, I'd like to welcome Dr. Anderson. How you doing today?
I'm all right. How you doing, Will?
Doing well, doing well. Yeah, so once again, I would like to thank you for joining us here today on Into the Afroverse. And just to get things started, I always ask people when we bring them on, we talk about Afrofuturism, what was it about Afrofuturism that actually got you into it and what brought you to this space?
Well, I'd say definitely one of the things that brought me to this space, and I've written about it probably since we got started in the movement a decade ago, really the limitations. I saw no future in the kind of political space that was, because I'm a kind of politically oriented guy. I saw no future in the space that the Obama administration was trying to articulate in relation to Black people. And I think a lot of other creatives saw it at that time. And I think even though Afrofuturism had been around roughly for about 25 years in small group settings and here and there articles, I think in the wake of the '08 election and the emergence of Bitcoin, the economic crash, and the rise of the reactionary right with the Tea Party that is now like the MAGA people, that the vision that Obama, at least domestically here, was trying to lay out was too limited. And I saw that there were motive forces in history that were bringing Africans back together in a political sense. And that's probably what got me into thinking about revisiting a politics of the future that would be needed. And that led me on the road towards the organizational point and developing a manifesto for the movement.
I see, yeah, all too often when people talk about Afrofuturism, the first thing they think of is the imagery. They automatically think of science fiction, fantasy, and things of that nature. And what I like about your description there, you're looking at it more from a political standpoint. So based on your observations and based on what you've studied and what you're currently seeing, how does Afrofuturism fit into this space and how does it assist us in building a better future?
Well, the thing of it is, it's political because the past is already done, put in stone, and we just fight over the interpretation of it. And the present is still being determined, but the future is not set yet.
Right.
And so my thing is, especially as one of the people that participated in the Ferguson Rebellion, and that's where I saw on the streets as a protester, I realized that one of the sites for battle was going to be who was going to influence the Black imagination.
Wow.
And that's where I remember there in Ferguson, where I saw on one side of the street, Don Lemon, who that's where he put his name, and Chris Hayes on the other side of the street. And both of them rode that to national prominence in media. And I've always thought that Chris Hayes was the brighter of the two of them from MSNBC. And I think Don Lemon, as his recent firing displayed, he outlived his Ferguson moment.
Right.
I don't think he had the depth to articulate the future of Black people in this country. And so it was going to be who was going to really put that kind of blueprint or that template in talking about a futurist Black space. Because most of our, a lot of our media types, entertainers and politicos, they pretty much are wedded to institutional entities that don't have our best interest at heart. So that's where I thought of a Black future as a radical space, because I think I was one of the first people to talk about politics where before you build or fight for freedom, whatever, you have to imagine it first. It all starts in our imagination before we add action to it.
Right.
And people in our community like that are always going to be in the minority. Most people are just tend to, live day to day, and they just most Black people are just people, period. They just want relief from uncertainty. And during a time of uncertainty, that's when creative people really start thinking of alternatives to the existence that they have to live in. And this battle over the Black imagination is really kind of being articulated by a small group of people right now. But I think it's slowly catching fire the last several years.
Yes.
And it's growing bigger and bigger. And one of the things I talked with John Jennings about, we were going to make sure is based on scholarship, and then what we create and what kind of community we build. And now here we are a decade later in the present. And I think we've pretty much up to this point made all the right moves.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. Now, you talked about this radical space, this Black radical space. What do you think has been missing from past movements? Because, when I saw footage from Ferguson, you saw footage from movements and actions in the aftermath of George Floyd's death, there was this idea that somehow or another what was happening today was brand new. You saw these signs, this generation got those hands and so forth, but it's something we've been doing. But in your opinion, what has been missing from that space that Afrofuturism is adding to it, if anything?
Well, Afrofuturism, and I'll just say this, some of the people that emerged out of that protest, I don't think they had a sophisticated analysis for where we needed to go. I think they had a message for sure, but didn't have a sophisticated analysis. And I think they underestimated previous lessons and overestimated what they thought of was new, but wasn't.
Right.
And that's why I think that movement collapsed not long after it got started. And I remember telling the young people that I was working with at the time, I said, you all got to look at this as going to be a generational long struggle. This moment here is going to mutate into a different moment within the next 5 years. You all are not going to see the ultimate outcome probably until you're in your 30s and 40s.
Right, right. So it seems like, what I like about Afrofuturism, and one of the things that really, I guess, brought me into it, really got me thinking about it, was this idea of actually working to build a future and not just going off of, hypes and likes and hashtags and so forth, but actually really looking at it, because I don't think enough conversation really develops around what will things actually look like. So in your opinion, based on where we are and what you've seen happen and what is currently happening, what direction do you see us moving in 5, 10, 50 years from now?
Well, right now, most of our people are not resilient enough to deal with what's on the way. So, and they're not prepared for what's on its way. I think the community, the only thing that's keeping the larger community of African descent together, which is, and this community is fragmented along several different axes or vectors. Only thing that really kind of keeps it together as a block is the external pressure from white supremacy.
Right.
That's pretty much it, because there's no central internal force or set of ethics that is unifying. So you got this internal thing going on and an external thing going on simultaneously. And so it's kind of within that, and then even regional varieties of what this thing is going to look like. And so I think, however, the Afrofuturists, we've laid a groundwork intellectually, creatively, aesthetically, and philosophically, just for people to have ways of thinking their way through this going into the future. And I would like to say here on this Mother's Day, a real mother of African descent, you could literally say is an Afrofuturist, because
Right.
they're the hands that mold the future.
True.
You know? And I told my wife, she's an Afrofuturist. She started smiling, because that's the big thing. When I asked my wife about what was important about motherhood to her, she said, our hands are on molding the future. I said, well, baby, that makes you an Afrofuturist. And they're not, and I think people who believe in motherhood are in the minority. Now, there are other ways people want to articulate that, but that's part of the fragmentation issue. Because mothers build things.
Right.
People, just because you have an infant or give birth to something doesn't make you a mother. Mothers actually build things. And then we don't have it. And builders are always going to be in the minority. It's easier to burn something down or tear something up than to have the insight and knowledge, or acquire the knowledge of how to build something.
Wow.
And, it's easier to burn down a building than to learn the architecture and stuff to build, to be an architect of something.
That is correct. And if you're just joining us, this is Into the Afroverse with your host, William Jones, where we're taking Black folks into the future. And we are joined by Dr. Reynaldo Anderson. And we're looking at ways in which Afrofuturism can help, I guess, shape our thoughts, shape our thinking, assist us, as you stated, in laying the groundwork and the foundation for a better future. I tend to agree. I think, you mentioned how white supremacy in many ways is kind of keeping Black people together. And I think that's a dangerous strategy, but I think that's what has happened. And I think the smart white supremacist knows, not to poke the bear, so to speak. And I think the smart white supremacist knows that when things are relatively calm, that's the best time for white supremacy. But when you have folks kind of poking the bear and energizing Black folks and kind of forcing us into a corner to react, in many ways, they're upset with those folks that are doing those things. So I would totally agree with you. Yeah,
because the thing is, the real dangers of the world, man, we're not worried about somebody like a Marjorie Taylor Greene or Plantas. Those people are simple.
Right.
Because the real danger is the ones that want to create a kind of African descent buffer class.
Right.
Give them a few more privileges and benefits than the masses get, and put them in positions where they make them kind of structural gatekeepers to discern for them what's happening and influence their own policy decisions that impact the domestic policy that impacts our communities. And these people, and see, what we really don't want to have the conversation. See, if we really had a Black futuristic set of ethics or non-negotiables, it makes it easier to identify who those people are.
Right.
Yeah. Tim Scott, the senator of South Carolina, is Black, and so is Clarence Thomas, but his values are not aligned with mine.
Agreed.
And I'm not so sure that many of the Black people in the Biden administration are aligned with our values.
Right.
You know, and so this is bigger than D's and R's.
Agreed.
Whether they're a D or an R, their primary mission is to uphold the people, the goals of the people who hire them.
Right.
First. And that's where their allegiance lies. It lies to their economic interests. And that's why in this wave of Afrofuturism, what makes it different from the earlier wave, we're thinking about, what are our economics getting ready to look like here? How are we looking at things like motherhood? How are we looking at things like, how do you put, like, as I alluded to, that a real mother is really part of the architecture of what creates a family, however you choose to define family. And having a mothering spirit, looks different in different settings.
Right.
And in terms of building, what does it take to build a family? Because if you can't build a family, you can't build a community.
Right.
And a lot of people we have to be wary of, they just want to use Afrofuturism to explore their trauma. Right. And I think with Afrofuturism, what's emerging now is going to offer a set of ethics or a blueprint for how you look at it. But you got to learn how to discern people who just want to use it for, some clickbait on their social media, or who really want to help build something, or whoever just want to use it as a kind of a rebranding thing for this latest phase in capitalism.
Right.
And that requires, like anything, that requires study and practice and engagement.
I see. So, and you're kind of answering my next question with that response, but why don't you speak a little bit more to, you mentioned what you see as a lack of preparedness for many of us moving forward, a lack of resiliency. And I would imagine people would ask, in your opinion, what does this resiliency look like? What is it that we would need in preparation to move forward?
I think resiliency, part of resiliency is, here's what a lack of resiliency looks like.
Right.
I would be willing to bet you a lot of times the average person in our community, if you just ask them, they'll tell you on the street, man, how things going or what's going on. And they'll say, man, day to day, bro, day to day. They have a day-to-day philosophy. They can't, that's why with all this, some of the dysfunctionalism community, a lot of those people, they can't see a future beyond next week.
Right.
Or even the end of the month or next year. And a lot of that type of behavior is dangerous, because then they'll engage in activities and practices that can be unhealthy. And what they use to neutralize that, whatever they're missing, that impacts their resiliency, they want to get high on religion, high on drugs, high on sex.
Right.
And these other things out here that to try and take that, whatever they're missing, away. Or as some people, as it's become popular to say recently, hurt people hurt people.
Right.
And that's why in some of the recent work we've done, we clearly state what Afrofuturism is and what it isn't. And some people don't necessarily like it, but we didn't create this to make everybody happy. Afrofuturism is not for all Black people. Just because you look like us don't mean you're going to be a part of this, because we're trying to create set of standards that can embrace a big umbrella approach. And for some people, it's not in their interest to want to work to create something like that. And hey, the door goes both ways. And we need to be willing to say, and we be willing to talk about it, but some people who, if they're just in it to just sell some stuff or to get invited to some stuff and this kind of stuff, that's where the scholarship and study comes in. If you read our stuff, what we put out there, it's been out there for some years now. It's pretty unambiguous. We're not trying to hide anything.
Right.
And so I'd say now we've got a good basic foundation in place to begin to build some more on.
Excellent. And how can folks find you? Where can they find your work?
Oh man, Google is good. Google
Mhm.
Scholar. Our stuff is all out there on the internet. A lot of the other people that are in our network that we call the Black Speculative Arts Movement, that's not everybody. That's just largely people, some of the key people in it, but we can't fit everybody that's in the movement on the page. We could go into the hundreds of people.
Right.
Um, but we're not hard to find for people that's interested in the work and in trying to acquire the knowledge. And we actually have a new volume coming out here in the next few weeks, a special issue of the Black Scholar that deals with Africology and the rise of Afrofuturist studies. That kind of gives it a hint in terms of a school of thought
Right.
around Afrofuturism, where people, I think, will be a good scholarly primer for people to read, to figure out where the movement is right now,
Mhm.
in terms of how a school of thought within African American studies is thinking about this.
Excellent. Uh, so in terms of what it is or what it isn't, as you described it, what would be
Mhm.
some of the things, for someone just hearing about this, gaining familiarity with it, what would you tell them it is, and what would you tell them Afrofuturism isn't?
What I would tell them is this: it's an emerging philosophy of how people of African descent locate themselves in time and space with agency. Okay.
Mhm.
For example, what that looks like. It's okay for a European person to say, like, if they want to use European thought to talk about going back and forth in time, they would use a concept from the Greek philosopher Plato called metaxis, which
Mhm.
means to go back and forth. And that's why in the European scholarly tradition, they use the term metamodern when they want to use something from their past to bring it up through the modern era into this moment. It is also ethical for a person of African descent to use, well, I'm not going to use metamodern, I'll use Sankofa, which
Right.
means I'm going to go back and retrieve something of value and bring it into the present to make sense of my present and project it into the future. I'm just using an alternative geography of reason. European scholars that are Eurocentric use Europe,
Right.
okay, as their geography of reason. Malcolm X said, if you get black, you should be thinking black. And so to philosophically put it, your geography of reason should be Africa. Okay. 90% of our ancestors came over here via the transatlantic horror of the slave trade out of the Gulf of Guinea, and can trace that going all the way to different parts of West Africa, going from Senegal all the way down to Angola.
Mhm.
So, but if you want to use classical geography of reason, you could go beyond the West African kingdoms and go all the way back to the Nile Valley civilization. And so that's what I'm saying. Our brand of Afrofuturism is based upon a ethical and philosophically defensible perspective based upon anthropology, our history, and our DNA, which is logical.
Right.
So that's what Afrofuturism, how it's being articulated right now. And I don't say Afrofuturism is blackness interpreted through a science fiction lens. No, science fiction is a European creation that was largely invented at the end of the 19th century by British intellectuals during a crisis in the British Empire. That's why I don't say that.
Mhm.
That's why in the manifesto I wrote that no, the Black speculative tradition emerged alongside the European science fiction tradition at the same time, except our modern speculative way of thinking and design emerged as a response to white supremacy, imperialism, colonialism, and scientific racism.
Right.
Yes.
Excellent. And what is it not? Because once again, as you mentioned, you see it, you're seeing it more and more, and it seems like folks are just finding it and they're just kind of tacking it on to their music, they're tacking it on to their various forms of expression, and some
Yeah.
folks are getting confused. So what would you say it's not?
Well, it's not. You just say, like, for instance, I don't, like I said, people are like, oh, it's science fiction, whatever. That's because they just haven't read enough And,
Right.
you know, science fiction as a trope is a way of looking at it.
Mhm.
Like some people would just say, I'm black sci-fi, you know,
Right.
because a lot of these people that are saying that they're not scholars, you know,
Right.
you know, so science fiction is all they know at the time because this has not been taught widely in academic settings until recently.
Mhm.
So they'll say, oh, it's science fiction mixed with this, that, and the other, with black culture, black music, or whatever. And so they like it in terms of a, you know, a layman's parlance way
Right.
of talking about it, you know, and so that's fine. Because you know, most people, black people, we know that jazz is a black creation, but they've never studied black sound studies or anything like that. So I'm talking as a scholar in
Right.
terms of talking about what it is and isn't. But the key thing is it advances black agency into the future. Now, if you're not talking about black agency in the future in relation to a futuristic lens, you're not really talking about Afrofuturism.
I
Okay.
understand. I understand. And for
Yeah.
me, to hear agency and putting us in the future, and I oftentimes remind folks of this, I also think protection.
Yeah.
And, you know, as I've said many times before, one of the things that I'm concerned of is protecting Afrofuturism and maintaining, as you've given us clarity on what it is, maintaining and controlling Afrofuturism as it moves forward. How
Well,
do we
can I
do?
add?
Please.
I'm gonna give you an example. People always talking about, you've heard the term, oh, community and nation time. Well, guess what? As an Afrofuturist, and I said earlier, if you don't understand what a family looks like or to participate in one, that you can't build community, you got to think, what does it term to think to govern a nation?
Right.
You know, because guess what? If you're governing a nation, then you got to have a concept of just war theory. Okay, so if you have a nation, even if it's in your imagination going into the future, we have some type of space what does just war theory look like in defending your nation?
Right.
Okay, now just war theory has its roots in the Nile Valley civilization, but it was, you know, kind of translated into Europeanness into their Christian centric perspective in the West, you know, but the first concepts of just war theory come out of Africa. So what is a just war theory? I mean, because for me, the American civil rights movement, that was a temporary strategy to just get through a situation, but it's not a way of life.
Right.
And that's what John Henry Clark said. The civil rights strategy of that, what they believed in should look at be, John Henry Clark said, is like a lemon. You use it, you make lemonade, and after it's gone, you throw away the skin and you do something else.
Right.
You
And
know, and that framework doesn't make sense anymore.
agreed. And I think that too many folks, you know, they see or that, you know, they look at a documentary, they look at a film, and they get so excited and enamored with what they've seen in the past that we're trying to replicate that in the present. And we can see that it's not working. I mean, we're literally singing the same songs,
Yeah,
you know.
yeah,
So
that's right.
you know, and I definitely would agree that something like Afrofuturism and taking on that mindset and looking forward, that is a big part of what we need. So
Yes.
I certainly salute you on that. You know, believe it or not, that half hour went pretty quickly.
Okay.
Can you leave us with some final thoughts, and would you come back to the show to have further conversation with us?
Sure, I would. I would say final closing thoughts are the way Afrofuturism even looked like 3 years ago has changed. Effective last year of 2022 to now is when the big shift happened, because I would say domestically, you got to look at the institutional thing, where from the Carnegie Hall project up into the recent Smithsonian project means that Afrofuturism has been accepted by the cultural institutions of the world, whether it's Carnegie, the Tate Museum in London, all throughout the high-tech world. It's an institutional thing now. And then, as I mentioned earlier, I saw my Facebook page, and you're a Facebook friend. For the first time, I was interviewed, they translated my stuff into Russian.
Oh, congratulations.
Voice of America, which has traditionally been an American propaganda a way of propagandizing American culture around the world. And they got it when I said Afrofuturism is the new jazz, in terms of when jazz was new 50, 60, 70 years ago, and they promoted it. And now I guess they want to shoot it around the world that Black people in America are doing a new thing, and it's called Afrofuturism. The Afrofuturism now has to deal with a multipolar world now, because
Gotcha.
globalization is breaking down. Afrofuturism, the ideas emerged at the end of the Cold War, the modern sensibilities of it, in the 90s after the end of the Cold War. And now the Afrofuturism that is required now has to be defined in relation to the end of globalization.
Okay, I'm sorry. I gotta cut you because they're gonna cut us. So I want to bring you back and we can talk more about that. Once again, Dr. Anderson, thank you so much for joining us on Into the Afroverse. That'll do it for us this morning. Once again, thank you for tuning in. Thank you for listening. And this is Into the Afroverse with your host, William Jones. We're taking Black folks into the future. And a special shout out to Mr. Duke Productions for producing today's episode. Thank you.